Snow fell thick and merciless, swallowing the forest in silence. Two police officers lay buried beneath the frozen ground, their mouths taped, their bodies going numb with every passing second. No one knew where they were. No one was coming. There was no way out. No sirens, no voices, no hope. Then, a small pair of footprints appeared in the snow. A little girl, no older than 8, stumbled through the blizzard, her cheeks red, her breath shaking. Beside her ran a German shepherd, alert, focused, moving with purpose. She wasn't lost. She was following her dog. Then, the dog suddenly stopped. His ears snapped forward. He began barking, wild, urgent digging at the snow like his life depended on it. "What is it?" the girl whispered, her heart pounding. At first, she thought he'd lost his mind. But she was wrong. Terribly wrong. Because the dog was searching for someone. Every instinct inside him screamed that something was wrong. Then she heard it. A faint knock from beneath the snow. What they uncovered next would change the fate of 2 officers. Expose a crime meant to stay hidden forever and prove something no one could explain. The forest had never felt this quiet before. Snow blanketed everything in thick, untouched layers, swallowing sound the way water swallows light. Tall pine trees stood frozen in place, their branches heavy with ice, bending but never breaking. Even the wind seemed afraid to move. It was the kind of silence that made your ears ring, the kind that made trained officers uneasy. Earlier that morning, officers David Hall and Elena Rodriguez had been dispatched on a routine patrol near the outskirts of the forest. A suspicious vehicle had been reported near a closed service road. Nothing urgent, nothing dangerous. Just another winter call in a place where most people never went once the snow came down. Their last radio transmission had been calm. "Probably just someone lost," David had said, his voice steady. "We'll check it out and head back." Minutes later, the radio crackled again, then went dead. No panic, no call for backup. Just silence. At first, dispatch assumed it was a signal issue. The forest was notorious for that. But when 15 minutes passed, then 30, concern crept in. Calls went unanswered. GPS tracking stopped updating. The last known location blinked on the screen, surrounded by nothing but white. By the time a search unit was authorized, the weather had turned vicious. Snow began falling harder, thicker, erasing footprints almost as soon as they formed. Visibility dropped to a dangerous minimum. Helicopters were grounded. Vehicles couldn't reach the area without chains, and even then, only barely. The forest was closing in. What no one knew, not dispatch, not the search teams, not even the officers' families, was that David and Elena were no longer patrolling. They were no longer standing. They were buried, deep beneath the frozen snow. The 2 officers lay trapped in total darkness. Cold pressed against them from every direction, stealing heat, strength, and time. Every breath was shallow. Every second mattered. Above them, the forest remained perfectly still. No tracks, no signs of struggle, no indication that 2 lives were fading beneath the snow. If anyone had been watching from a distance, they would have seen nothing out of place. Just trees, snow, silence. And that was the most terrifying part, because in a forest this quiet, danger doesn't announce itself. It waits. The little girl had been warned not to go this far into the woods. Everyone in town knew the rule once winter came. The forest was no place for children. The snow hid sinkholes, fallen branches, frozen streams that looked solid but weren't. Grown men got lost out there. Even trained officers treated it with caution. But she hadn't planned to come this far. Her name was Maya, and she was only 9 years old. The day had started like any other quiet winter afternoon. School had been canceled because of the storm. The house felt too small, too silent. Her father was working a double shift. Her mother hadn't come home in months. And the only one who truly understood her need to breathe, to move, to feel safe outside those walls, walked beside her now. A German shepherd. The police dog padded calmly through the snow at her side, his dark coat dusted white, his breath rising in steady clouds. His name was Kaiser. He wasn't supposed to be off duty. He wasn't supposed to be here. But Kaiser had been her protector ever since the night everything in her life had changed. Kaiser wasn't just a police dog to Maya. He was family. Her father had warned her to stay near the tree line, just enough for Kaiser to stretch his legs. And for a while, she did. They walked slowly, Maya's boots crunching softly as Kaiser moved with confident ease, scanning the surroundings the way he always did. But something pulled her deeper. Maybe it was the quiet, maybe it was the way Kaiser suddenly lifted his head, ears twitching. Or maybe it was that feeling in her chest, the one that told her something wasn't right. Maya stopped walking. "Kaiser," she whispered. The dog slowed, then stopped completely. His posture changed in an instant, his tail stiffened, his ears locked forward. The playful calm vanished, replaced by something sharper, something alert. Maya's heart began to race. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely louder than the falling snow. Kaiser didn't look at her. He stared straight ahead into the forest. The trees seemed closer here, darker, the snow deeper. Maya hugged her coat tighter around herself, suddenly aware of how alone they were. She thought about turning back, thought about the rules, thought about her father's warning. Then Kaiser took a step forward, not playful, not curious, purposeful. Maya swallowed hard. She shouldn't have followed him. But she did. And with each step she took deeper into the forest, she had no idea she was walking straight toward two lives that were already slipping away. Kaiser stopped so abruptly that Maya nearly walked into him. 1 second he was moving forward with steady purpose. The next he was frozen, every muscle in his body locked tight. His ears stood straight up, twitching slightly as if tuning into a sound no human could hear. His head lowered just a fraction, eyes fixed on a patch of snow ahead that looked no different from the rest. "Kaiser," Maya whispered again, this time with fear creeping into her voice. He didn't respond. The forest felt different now. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was heavy, pressing down on her chest. Maya followed Kaiser's gaze, squinting at the ground. All she saw was snow, thick, smooth, undisturbed. Then Kaiser let out a low whine. It wasn't a bark, it wasn't a growl, it was something else entirely. Concern. Kaiser stepped forward slowly, cautiously, as if approaching something fragile. He lowered his nose to the ground and sniffed deeply, drawing in the frozen air. His breathing changed, faster, sharper, urgent. Maya felt her stomach twist. "What do you smell?" she asked, her voice trembling despite herself. Kaiser didn't answer, but he reacted. Without warning, he dropped his front legs and began digging. Snow flew everywhere as his powerful paws tore into the ground. He worked with frantic precision, scraping, pushing, digging deeper and deeper. His movements weren't playful. This wasn't chasing a scent or uncovering a buried stick. This was different. "Kaiser, stop!" Maya cried, panicking. "What are you doing?" But Kaiser didn't slow down. His breathing grew heavier. He whined again, louder this time, then barked, sharp, short, urgent. The sound echoed through the trees, slicing through the silence like a warning. Maya dropped to her knees beside him, her gloves sinking into the snow. She tried to see what he was seeing, to understand what he knew. As Kaiser dug, the snow beneath his paws collapsed unnaturally, sinking more than it should have. Maya's breath caught. "Kaiser," she whispered. He dug faster. Then, suddenly, he stopped. Kaiser lowered his head into the hole he had made and went still. His body trembled, not from the cold, but from intensity. He sniffed once more, then let out a sound Maya had never heard from him before. A cry. It wasn't loud, but it was full of urgency and distress. Kaiser backed up slightly and pawed at the hole again, then looked back at Maya, his dark eyes wide and insistent. He wanted her to understand. Maya leaned closer, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She placed her hand near the edge of the hole, listening, watching, holding her breath. And that's when she felt it. A faint vibration beneath the snow. Not wind, not shifting ground. Something else. Something alive. Maya froze. Her hand hovered just above the snow as she leaned closer to the hole Kaiser had dug. The forest held its breath with her. For a moment she thought she had imagined it. Just another trick of the wind moving through the trees. Then she heard it again. Tap. It was faint. So faint, she almost missed it. Not loud enough to echo, not strong enough to break the surface, but it was there, a sound that didn't belong. Maya pressed her ear closer to the ground, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. Kaiser lowered his head beside hers, whining softly, his nose nearly touching the snow. Tap, tap. Maya's eyes widened. That's not the wind, she whispered, her voice shaking. Kaiser let out a sharp bark, then began digging again, harder this time. Snow sprayed over Maya's coat as his paws worked furiously, carving deeper into the frozen ground. The neat white surface collapsed in uneven clumps, revealing darker, packed snow beneath. The sound grew clearer. A muffled thud. A scrape. Something struggling. Maya's breath came fast and shallow. Her fingers went numb. Not just from the cold, but from fear. She wanted to stand up, wanted to run. Every instinct screamed that she shouldn't be here. But Kaiser didn't stop. He dug with desperation now. His movements wild yet controlled, as if he knew exactly where to aim. His whines grew louder, more urgent, and he barked again. Short, sharp bursts meant to alert anyone who might be listening. No one was. Maya swallowed hard and grabbed the small shovel strapped to her backpack. Her hands shook as she began scooping snow away, helping Kaiser as best she could. Each scoop revealed more compacted snow, packed unnaturally tight. "Someone's under there," she whispered, her voice breaking. The tapping came again stronger this time. Tap. Tap. Tears stung Maya's eyes as the reality hit her. Whoever was down there was alive, barely. And every second they stayed buried, the cold was stealing more of them away. "Hold on!" Maya cried, her voice rising despite herself. "We're here, please, just hold on!" Kaiser dug faster, his breathing ragged. Then suddenly his paw struck something solid. He froze. Maya's heart stopped. Kaiser gently brushed the snow aside with careful movements. Now, slower, more precise. Beneath the thinning layer of snow, something dark emerged. Fabric. Maya gasped. She scraped away more snow, her fingers aching, her vision blurring with tears. A sleeve appeared. Dark blue, stiff with frost. A shoulder, then a face. A man's face. His eyes were closed, his skin pale, lips tinged blue. A strip of silver tape was pressed tightly over his mouth. Maya screamed. Kaiser barked wildly, circling, then returned to the man's side, nudging his shoulder, whining loudly. The man's chest moved, just barely. He was alive. Maya collapsed back into the snow, shaking, staring at the officer buried beneath her feet. And somewhere beneath the snow beside him, she knew he wasn't alone. Maya's scream echoed through the trees, sharp and terrified, before the forest swallowed it whole. She scrambled backward, her hands slipping in the snow, her heart pounding so violently she thought it might burst. Her eyes stayed locked on the man's face, pale, motionless, half buried beneath the frozen ground. The strip of tape across his mouth looked wrong, unnatural, like someone had wanted to make sure no sound ever escaped. "Oh no, oh no," she whispered, her breath coming out in panic bursts. Kaiser rushed to the man's side, barking urgently, then lowered his head and pressed his nose against the officer's cheek. He whined softly, nudging him again and again, as if trying to wake him from a terrible sleep. The man groaned. Maya froze. His eyelids fluttered, just barely. His chest rose in a shallow, uneven breath. Snow clung to his eyelashes, and his skin looked numb and gray from the cold. "He's alive," Maya whispered, disbelief flooding her voice. "Kaiser, he's alive!" Kaiser barked again, louder this time, his tail stiff with urgency. He pawed at the snow around the officer's body. Careful now, controlled, digging just enough to free his shoulders and chest. Maya forced herself to move. She crawled back toward them, her hands shaking as she brushed snow away from the man's face. The tape over his mouth was frosted stiff. She hesitated, fear tightening her chest. "It's okay," she said softly, though she wasn't sure if she was speaking to the man or herself. "We're here." Her fingers worked at the edge of the tape, peeling it back slowly. The skin beneath was raw and pale. The man gasped sharply as the cold air hit his lips, sucking in a painful breath like it was his first in hours. He coughed weakly. Maya jumped. "Easy! Don't move!" she cried. The man's eyes cracked open, unfocused and glassy. He tried to speak, but only a hoarse rasp came out. His gaze shifted first to Maya, then to Kaiser. Relief flickered in his eyes. "Help," he whispered. Maya nodded frantically. "I will. I promise I'll get help." That's when Kaiser suddenly stiffened. His ears snapped forward, his body tensed not in relief, but in alarm. He turned sharply and began digging again, just a few feet away from the first hole. Maya followed his movement, dread flooding her chest. "No," she whispered. There's someone else." Kaiser dug faster, snow flying once more. His barks grew frantic, desperate. Maya dropped beside him and helped, clawing at the snow with numb fingers. Then it happened. The snow shifted, and a hand, blue, shaking, barely moving, broke through the surface. Maya let out a sob. "Kaiser, there's another one." 2 officers buried alive, and running out of time. Maya's breath hitched as she grabbed the hand sticking out of the snow. It was ice cold, stiff, barely responsive. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please be alive." Kaiser barked sharply, then dug around the second body with frantic urgency. Snow flew in every direction as he worked. His paws moving so fast Maya could barely keep up. She scooped snow away with trembling hands, her fingers aching as the cold bit deep into her skin. Bit by bit, the shape beneath the snow became clear. A uniform, a shoulder, a chest that wasn't moving. "No! No! No!" Maya cried. Kaiser stopped digging for just a second and pressed his nose against the officer's face. He whined softly, then let out a low, distressed sound that made Maya's chest tighten. This wasn't how Kaiser reacted to danger. This was how he reacted to loss. Maya's heart pounded. "Breathe," she whispered desperately. "Please, breathe." She brushed snow away from the officer's mouth and nose. His lips were blue. His skin was dangerously pale. She leaned closer, holding her breath, trying to feel even the faintest puff of air. Nothing. Panic surged through her. Tears spilled freely now, freezing on her cheeks. She looked around wildly, as if someone might suddenly appear out of the trees. No one did. Kaiser suddenly shifted his position, pressing his body against the officer's chest, then curling partially over him. His thick fur covered as much of the man as possible, shielding him from the biting wind. Maya stared. Kaiser was trying to keep him warm. "Oh, Kaiser," she whispered. The first officer groaned again, weak, but alive, his breathing shallow and uneven. Maya crawled over to him for a moment, fear clawing at her chest. "I'm here," she said softly. "Help is coming, I promise." She didn't know if that was true, but she needed him to believe it. Kaiser lifted his head suddenly and barked again, sharp and commanding, as if ordering her to act. Maya understood. They couldn't stay here. The second officer was slipping away. Every second buried in the snow stole more heat, more strength. If she waited, if she hesitated, she might lose him forever. Maya wiped her eyes with the back of her glove and forced herself to think. "I'm going to get help," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I'll come back, I swear." Kaiser looked at her, his dark eyes intense, filled with purpose. He barked once, short, strong. Then lay back down beside the officers, his body pressed protectively against them. Maya stood up slowly, legs trembling, heart pounding. Leaving them felt wrong, staying felt impossible. And somewhere deep down she knew. This was the moment everything depended on what she did next. Maya stood there, frozen between two impossible choices. The wind picked up, blowing loose snow across the clearing, stinging her face like needles. The forest no longer felt silent. It felt hostile. Time was slipping away with every breath she took, and she could almost feel it ticking down inside her chest. If she stayed, the officers might not last. If she left, they might die alone. Her gaze shifted from the first officer, who was barely conscious, to the second, who lay frighteningly still beneath Kaiser's body. The dog remained pressed against them, his muscles tense, his breath heavy as he tried to share what little warmth he had. Maya's hands shook. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, her voice swallowed by the wind. The first officer's eyes fluttered open again. He tried to lift his head but failed, a weak groan escaping his throat. His gaze found Maya, confusion and pain clouding his expression. "Don't leave," he murmured. Maya's heart cracked. "I'll come back," she said quickly, kneeling beside him. "I promise. I won't leave you. I just have to get help." She didn't know if he heard her. Kaiser lifted his head and looked directly at Maya. His eyes were intense, alert, filled with a kind of understanding that made her chest ache. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't panicking. He was waiting for her to decide. Maya swallowed hard. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "Think before you act." But this wasn't a problem that could be thought through slowly. This was about seconds, about survival. She reached into her backpack with trembling fingers and pulled out her scarf. Carefully, she wrapped it around the first officer's neck, tucking it into his uniform for warmth. Then she draped her extra gloves over the second officer's chest. "It's not much," she whispered, tears streaming freely now. "But it's all I have." Kaiser let out a low whine, as if urging her on. Maya stood, her legs weak beneath her. She looked around, memorizing every tree, every bend in the path, every detail she might need to find her way back. "I'm going to run," she said aloud, her voice shaking but determined. "I'll bring help. You have to stay alive." She turned to Kaiser and knelt in front of him, pressing her forehead gently against his. "Don't let them go," she whispered. Kaiser barked once, deep and steady. A promise. Maya took one last look at the two buried officers, then turned toward the forest. Her heart pounded as she took her first step away, because now there was no turning back. Maya ran. The moment she turned away from the clearing, fear slammed into her like a wave. The forest blurred around her as she pushed through knee-deep snow, her boots slipping, her lungs burning with every breath. Cold air tore into her chest, sharp and unforgiving. But she didn't slow down. She couldn't. Behind her, Kaiser stayed with the officers, alone in the snow, trusting her to come back. That thought alone kept her moving. Branches whipped at her coat as she forced her way through the trees, stumbling more than once, barely catching herself before falling face first into the snow. Her legs screamed in protest, already numb, already heavy. She had never run this far, never this fast, never this scared. "Help," she whispered between gasps, though no one was there to hear it. The wind howled louder now, carrying snow sideways, erasing the trail she'd made almost instantly. Panic clawed at her chest. What if she couldn't find her way back? What if the officers didn't last? No, she told herself fiercely. Don't think about that. She focused on one thing: getting to the ranger station near the forest edge. It wasn't far. It only felt far because fear stretched every second into agony. Her foot caught on a buried root. She went down hard. The impact knocked the air from her lungs. Snow filled her gloves, soaked her sleeves. For a terrifying moment, she lay there, dizzy, staring up at the gray sky, wondering if she could even get back up. Tears streamed down her face, freezing instantly. "I can't stop," she whispered. She forced herself onto her knees, then her feet, legs trembling violently. Pain shot through her ankle, but she ignored it. Pain didn't matter. Lives did. Maya staggered forward again, her breath coming in ragged sobs, her vision blurred, not just from tears, but from exhaustion. She could feel her strength fading, her body begging her to give up. That's when she saw it. A dark shape through the trees, a building. Hope surged through her like electricity. She screamed, then really screamed, throwing every ounce of strength into her voice. "Help! Please help!" The sound tore out of her throat, raw and desperate. She waved her arms wildly as she ran the last stretch, her legs threatening to collapse beneath her. The door of the ranger station flew open. A man stepped out, eyes widening in shock at the sight of her. Snow-covered, crying, barely standing. "There are officers!" she gasped, nearly falling forward. "They're buried! They're alive! Please hurry!" Her knees buckled as strong hands caught her. Behind her, somewhere deep in the forest, she knew it. Kaiser was still waiting. The moment Maya's words sank in, everything changed. The ranger's calm expression vanished, replaced by shock. He grabbed his radio with shaking hands, his voice sharp and urgent as he called in the report. "We have 2 officers buried alive in the north sector. Repeat, buried alive. They're alive but unresponsive. We need immediate medical response." Static crackled back, followed by stunned silence. Then chaos erupted. Inside the station, phones rang at once. Maps were spread across tables. Someone pulled up the last known GPS location of the missing officers, and when the coordinates matched Maya's frantic description, the room went quiet. "Oh my God," one of the deputies whispered. "That's where they lost signal." Search teams that had been preparing for a ground sweep suddenly understood the truth. The officers hadn't wandered off. They hadn't gotten lost. They had been taken and buried. Regret rippled through the room like a shockwave. If they had known sooner, if they had pushed harder, ignored the weather warnings, moved faster, those officers might not have spent hours freezing beneath the snow. "There's no time," the commander snapped. "Gear up now!" Medics rushed in, hauling thermal blankets, oxygen tanks, IV kits. Snowmobiles were prepped at record speed. The storm was still raging, but no one hesitated. Out in the parking lot, engines roared to life. Maya sat wrapped in a thick blanket, shaking uncontrollably, not from the cold alone, but from fear. An officer knelt in front of her, gripping her small hands gently. "You did the right thing," he said firmly. "You saved their lives." Maya swallowed, her voice barely audible. "My dog, Kaiser. He's still with them." The officer's jaw tightened. "Then he's buying them time." As the rescue convoy sped toward the forest, radios crackled with updates. Hypothermia risk critical. Burial time extended. Survival window closing. One medic shook his head grimly. "If we're not there in minutes..." No one finished the sentence. Snowmobiles tore through the forest, headlights cutting through the storm. Branches snapped. Snow sprayed high into the air. Every second felt stolen, deep in the woods. Beneath layers of snow and silence, two officers clung to life. And lying beside them, refusing to move, a police dog waited, holding the line until help arrived. The snowmobiles burst into the clearing like lifelines tearing through the storm. Engines screamed as rescuers jumped off before the machines had even stopped. Headlights swept across the snow, illuminating Kaiser first, lying rigid beside the two motionless bodies. His fur crusted with ice, his eyes wild but unyielding. "There!" someone shouted. Kaiser lifted his head instantly, barking once, sharp and urgent, then stepping aside just enough to let them through. He refused to leave, staying close as gloved hands tore into the snow around the officers. "Careful!" a medic yelled. "They're hypothermic!" Snow flew as shovels and hands worked together, uncovering David first. His breathing was shallow, uneven, but present. An oxygen mask was pressed to his face as a medic checked his pulse. "He's alive," the medic confirmed. "Barely." Relief flickered, then vanished as attention shifted to the second officer, Elena. Her body was dangerously still. A medic dropped to his knees beside her, pressing two fingers against her neck. His face tightened. "I don't have a pulse," he said. The words hit like a punch. "No, no." "Check again," another rescuer snapped. Kaiser let out a low, distressed cry and nudged Elena's shoulder, whining as if begging her to wake up. Snow clung to her lashes, her skin blue and waxy. "Start CPR now," the lead medic ordered. They moved fast. Compressions in the snow. Breaths forced into frozen lungs. Hands working against time itself. Kaiser circled frantically, barking, then lay down beside her again, pressing his body against her side, as if lending her his warmth and his strength. "Come on," the medic muttered. "Come on, stay with us." Maya watched from the edge of the clearing, wrapped in a blanket, held back by an officer's arm. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched her hands together, whispering over and over, "Please, please." Seconds stretched into agony. "Then I've got something," a medic shouted. Elena's chest jerked violently as she sucked in a shallow breath. Another followed, weak but real. "She's back!" someone yelled. The clearing erupted into movement. IV lines were started, thermal blankets wrapped tight. Oxygen tanks hissed as they worked to stabilize both officers. Kaiser finally collapsed to the ground beside them, panting heavily, exhaustion overtaking him now that the danger had eased. As the stretchers were lifted and rushed toward the snowmobiles, Kaiser struggled to his feet and followed, until Sergeant Cole, one of the handlers, knelt and caught him gently. "You did it, boy," he said, his voice thick. "You held on long enough." The engines roared again as the convoy sped away. Behind them, the storm continued to rage, but in the clearing, life had won. The truth came out slowly. It wasn't until the officers were stabilized and the adrenaline faded that the pieces finally began to fit together. Inside the emergency command center, investigators replayed the last hours of David and Elena's patrol, listening to fragments of radio chatter that had once seemed routine. Now they sounded different. David's voice had been calm, but alert. Elena's replies measured. Careful. They hadn't been lost. They had been watching someone. Earlier that morning, the two officers had spotted a vehicle parked near the closed service road, engine off, plates partially obscured, the kind of thing criminals used when they didn't want to be found. When David approached, the driver panicked. The confrontation escalated fast, too fast. What no one had known at the time was that the suspect wasn't alone. Hidden deeper in the forest was something far more dangerous. A stash tied to a larger operation. Evidence that could destroy a network of criminals who had been operating unnoticed for years. And David and Elena had found it. They were taken by surprise, the lead investigator said grimly. Overpowered. Bound. Silenced. The room fell quiet. Buried alive. Not as an accident, not to hide bodies, but to make sure they were never found. The suspect had assumed the snowstorm would erase everything. Tracks, signs of struggle, time itself. By the time anyone came looking, the forest would have swallowed the truth along with the officers. They were wrong. Maya's name appeared in every report. So did Kaiser's. Without the dog's training, his ability to sense life beneath the snow, no search pattern would have uncovered them in time. The clearing where they were found didn't register as suspicious on any map. No heat signatures, no visible disturbance. Just silence. This wasn't luck, the investigator said quietly. This was instinct, loyalty, and timing. As officers worked the case, arrests followed quickly. Warrants were issued. Evidence buried in the forest was recovered and linked directly to the suspects responsible for what nearly became a double homicide. Justice was already moving. But in the hospital, none of that mattered yet. David and Elena lay in separate rooms, hooked to monitors, wrapped in blankets, alive against every odd. Doctors called it a miracle. Medics called it impossible. But the ones who knew the truth, the ones who had seen it, they all said the same thing. A little girl listened when no one else could, and a police dog refused to give up. The hospital hallway was too quiet. Machines hummed softly behind closed doors, monitors beeping in steady, unforgiving rhythms. Maya sat on a plastic chair that felt far too big for her, her feet dangling above the floor. She clutched her jacket in both hands, twisting the fabric over and over until her fingers hurt. Time moved differently here. Minutes stretched into hours. Every passing nurse made her heart jump. Every muffled announcement over the intercom sent a jolt of fear through her chest. Kaiser lay at her feet. Finally, still, his head resting on his paws. But even now, his ears flicked at every sound. He hadn't truly relaxed. Not yet. Across the hall, doctors moved in and out of Elena's room with tense expressions. David's condition had stabilized. But Elena's was different. Hypothermia had stolen too much. Oxygen deprivation had done its damage. She flatlined twice in transit, a medic whispered quietly to another. Maya heard it anyway. Her throat tightened. Tears blurred her vision as she pressed her hands to her mouth, trying not to cry out loud. She felt small again, helpless, like the forest had followed her here. Kaiser lifted his head and looked at her. Maya dropped to her knees beside him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Please," she whispered into his fur. "You can't stop now. She needs you." As if sensing something, Kaiser stood suddenly. Tail stiff. Eyes locked on Elena's door. Inside the room, alarms screamed. Doctors rushed in. A nurse shouted for a crash cart. The monitor's steady rhythm broke into a flat, piercing tone that sliced through the hallway. "She's gone!" someone yelled. Maya froze. Her world tilted violently, as if the ground beneath her had vanished. She squeezed her eyes shut, shaking her head in denial. "No, no, no," she whispered. Inside the room, compressions began fast, relentless. A doctor barked orders. Another prepared the defibrillator. The paddles charged with a rising whine. "Clear!" Elena's body jerked. Nothing. Again? "Clear!" Shock. Still nothing. Kaiser barked suddenly, one sharp, desperate sound, then lunged toward the door, straining against the handler holding his harness. "Wait," the doctor said suddenly, staring at the monitor. Everyone froze. A blip appeared. Then another. A weak, uneven line crawled across the screen. "I've got a rhythm," the nurse breathed. Elena gasped. A shallow, ragged breath. But a breath. The room erupted into controlled chaos as doctors worked to stabilize her, voices overlapping with urgency and disbelief. Out in the hallway, Maya collapsed against Kaiser, sobbing openly now. The handler let go, and Kaiser pressed his head into her chest. Steady and warm, against the odds, against the cold, against time itself. Elena was still alive, and everyone in that hallway knew they had just witnessed a miracle. Morning light filtered softly through the hospital windows, pale and gentle, as if afraid to disturb what had happened during the night. Maya sat curled up in the same chair, eyes red and swollen from crying, her head resting against Kaiser's shoulder. Neither of them had slept. They hadn't needed to. Waiting had consumed every ounce of energy they had. When the doctor finally approached, his expression was different this time. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't tense. He smiled. "They're both stable," he said quietly. "We moved them out of critical care an hour ago." Maya's breath caught in her throat. "Both?" she whispered. The doctor nodded. "Both." The words shattered something inside her, releasing everything she'd been holding in. She covered her face as tears streamed through her fingers, relief crashing over her in waves so strong she could barely stay upright. Kaiser lifted his head and wagged his tail once, slow and deliberate, as if he understood exactly what had just been said. "The hypothermia was severe," the doctor continued, kneeling so he was eye level with her. "Another 10 minutes in that snow and we wouldn't be having this conversation." Maya looked down at Kaiser, her voice trembling. "He saved them." The doctor followed her gaze, studying the dog with quiet respect. "Yes," he said softly. "He did." Later that day, Maya was allowed to see them. David was awake first, pale but smiling weakly as she stepped into his room. His voice was hoarse, his movements slow, but his eyes were clear. "You're the kid," he said, managing a faint chuckle. "The one who didn't give up." Maya shook her head quickly. "Kaiser found you." David reached out and rested his hand gently on the dog's head. "Then you both saved us." In the next room, Elena slept peacefully, wrapped in blankets, a steady monitor beside her bed. Her chest rose and fell in slow, even breaths, proof that she was still here. Maya stood there for a long moment, watching, just watching. She hadn't realized how heavy fear was until it was gone. Outside the room, nurses whispered about miracles, about timing, about impossible survival stories that shouldn't have ended this way. But Maya knew the truth. It wasn't just luck. It was a little girl who listened, a dog who refused to leave, and 2 officers who held on just long enough, and in a forest once buried in silence. Life had won. The story didn't end at the hospital. It spread. By the next morning, news vans lined the street outside. Cameras pointed toward the entrance. Reporters speaking in hushed, urgent tones. A rescue that should have ended in tragedy had somehow turned into something else entirely. Hope. Inside, Maya sat beside her father. His arm wrapped tightly around her shoulders, as if letting go might make her disappear. He hadn't stopped shaking since he arrived, not from the cold, but from the realization of how close he'd come to losing her. "You shouldn't have been out there," he whispered, his voice breaking. "But thank you." Maya didn't know what to say. She just leaned into him. Kaiser pressed firmly against her other side. Officers from every department came to visit David and Elena. Some brought flowers. Others brought quiet tears. Seasoned men and women who had seen too much stood silently at their bedsides, shaken by how close they had come to attending 2 funerals instead. David joked weakly about owing Kaiser a lifetime supply of treats. Elena, still pale but smiling, reached out and took Maya's hand the first time she saw her. "You didn't run away," she said softly. "You stayed. That matters." Maya swallowed hard. "I almost didn't," she admitted. "But you did," Elena replied. And that changed everything. Later that afternoon, a small ceremony took place in the hospital courtyard. Nothing official, no speeches, just people who needed to acknowledge what had happened. Kaiser sat calmly as a police captain knelt and clipped a silver medallion onto his harness. It read, "Canine Valor Award." Applause broke out, soft at first, then louder. Kaiser wagged his tail once. Maya stood beside him, cheeks burning, overwhelmed by the attention. Someone handed her a folded flag, pressed gently into her hands. "For bravery," the captain said, "and for listening when it mattered." The cameras captured it all, but none of that was what made the moment unforgettable. What mattered was David and Elena standing together nearby, still weak, still healing, but alive. Alive because a little girl trusted her instincts, alive because a dog refused to leave, and alive because sometimes heroes don't wear badges or uniforms. Sometimes they walk on 4 legs. Weeks later, the forest looked different. The snow had melted just enough to reveal the ground beneath, muddy, scarred, no longer hiding what it once had. Yellow tape marked the clearing where everything had changed, fluttering softly in the breeze. It no longer felt ominous. It felt honest. David and Elena stood side by side, stronger now, their uniforms crisp, their movements steady. They had returned to the place they nearly died, not out of fear, but out of gratitude. "We shouldn't be here," David said quietly. "But we are," Elena replied. Maya stood with her father a few steps back, Kaiser sitting proudly at her side. He watched the officers carefully, tail wagging once as they approached. "We owe you our lives," Elena said, kneeling in front of Maya. Her voice was calm, but her eyes shone. "Not just for finding us, but for believing we were still worth saving." Maya shook her head. "Kaiser knew," she said simply. "I just followed him." Elena smiled and reached out, placing her hand on Kaiser's head. "Then he taught us something important." Later that day, charges were officially announced. The men responsible for burying the officers were in custody. Evidence recovered from the forest dismantled an entire criminal operation. What was meant to silence the truth had exposed it instead. At the press conference, a reporter asked David what had gone through his mind when he realized he might not survive. He didn't hesitate. "I thought about my family," he said. "And then I thought about the sound of digging. I knew someone hadn't given up on us," Elena added quietly. "Hope is a powerful thing, so is loyalty." As the crowd dispersed, Maya walked away from the cameras, back toward the trees. Kaiser trotted beside her, relaxed now, finally at peace. The forest was quiet again. But this time, the silence felt earned, because 2 lives had been returned. Truth had been uncovered, and a little girl had learned something she would carry forever. Sometimes, the smallest voice makes the biggest difference. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And remember, heroes don't always come when you call. Sometimes they're already listening.